Inflation through the roof.
Grocery prices up 11% year over year.
Censorship of dissident voices. Freezing of bank accounts.
Justin Trudeau invoking emergency powers against the truckers. Banks can now freeze their personal accounts, the accounts of anyone linked to the Freedom Convoy.
Digital surveillance and communism spreading.
What do we want?
Basic income!
With the basic income, I felt a sense of security because I didn't have to worry about not going hungry, and I didn't have to worry about being kicked out of my apartment.
The government is on the verge of bankruptcy, and they're coming for your money.
Is Canada's federal debt increasing in real time, now surpassing $1.2 trillion. This debt is draining taxpayer dollars, with interest alone costing $54 billion this year.
It's time to break free and start saving in money they can't take from you. Since 2013, the folks at Bull Bitcoin have one mission: destroy central banking. Bull Bitcoin is the most trusted Bitcoin company in Canada. They empower you to buy, sell, and pay bills with Bitcoin. They are 100% non-custodial, which means that you always maintain full control over your Bitcoin, allowing you to reclaim your financial sovereignty and secure your wealth for the future. Their customer support will assist you throughout the whole process, helping you get your hands on the hardest money ever created. Escape their financial gulag, click on the link below, and start buying Bitcoin today and get a $20 bonus as a listener of Liberty Dispatch. Well, friends, it is my pleasure to have with me again on Liberty Dispatch, John Speed. John is married to Kim, and they have 5 children and 3 grandchildren. He's the pastor of missions and evangelism at By the Word Baptist Church in Azle, Texas. John co-produced Babies Are Murdered Here and Babies Are Still Murdered Here. He planted Christ the King Baptist Church in Syracuse, New York, and he's a co-founder of Lure TV. John, thanks so much for joining me on The Dispatch. It's a shame we didn't get to hang out in person when you were in the London area, but nevertheless, it's great to see you here now.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm glad we're getting to do this.
So the reason I wanted to have you on is I wanted to have a discussion about the pro-life abolition discrepancy, that kind of spectrum of views on how it is that we need to go about seeing the murder of innocent preborn babies come to an end in our countries. And I find that with the prevalence of social media, whether you see lots of videos, maybe it's just my algorithm, but lots of videos of the stuff that they're doing with abolitionists rising, seeing various debates and discussions. I know Doug Wilson had one with T. Russell recently. And I think Christians have been awakened to the fact that there's stuff in the pro-life movement that is very problematic and almost seems to work against the goal of saving babies from slaughter. So I find that this is the awareness of this, or the importance of, and the prevalence of the discussions has been heightened in the minds of many evangelicals who are more aware of what's going on and are trying to think of what's the best way to go about it. And so generally speaking, this discussion, usually on either end, you have abolitionism, we'll say immediate abolitionism, nothing less than the end of the slaughter of preborn babies is acceptable or godly or God-honoring or righteous. And then let's say all the way on the other end would be the pro-life movement, which would say, oh, yeah, we obviously want it to end, but we don't want to really penalize anyone for it, and we may actually work against actual bills that stop it. And then you have some other kind of, some variations in the middle. So I guess for anyone who's unfamiliar with this discussion or this discussion in these terms, kind of outline those 2 main positions and kind of give us the lay of the land when it comes to professing Christians and bringing about the end of what is euphemistically called abortion.
Yeah. Euphemistically, because really what it is, as it shows behind me, it's child sacrifice. And in Canada, you've got human sacrifice generally with MAID and all that stuff. But the lay of the land, the pro-life movement, for the most part, has prided itself on its incrementalism. In the States, it's 50 plus years of taking steps, to try to quote unquote move the ball forward. And after all this time, we're really not any closer to ending it in spite of the Dobbs decision with Roe. The numbers have actually increased by over 100,000 a year since then. So we're in a spot where over the last probably 12 to 15 years, there's been a movement that's risen up called abolition that's calling for the immediate end of abortion without any compromise. And there's a lot of things that abolitionists do, but one of the things that we've been doing lately is putting forward abolitionist bills in the state legislatures that call on the state to apply the criminal code to the abortion issue, to make it a crime to have an abortion, to be involved with an abortion in any way, just like if they were involved in a murder, someone was involved in a murder in any way, all the participating parties would be charged with that. And so that's what those bills have been doing in the states that, probably for the last 10 or 12 years. And so, that's the two main positions, generally pro-life. The pro-life side will hold on to a two-victim theory, that the woman is the second victim of abortion, whereas increasingly what's happening in the States in particular is that most abortions are moving in the direction of the first trimester, do-it-yourself, self-managed chemical at home. And so the pro-life movement has said, well, we need to go after the abortionists. Fine. But now that increasingly means you should be going after the mother as well, because she is doing this at home in her bathroom and then burying the evidence in her backyard or flushing it down the toilet. And so,
quick question before you move. I just have a quick question. Why do you think that position is taken? Do you think that and maybe not so much do you think, or do you think that position is taken either A, because a faulty hermeneutic doesn't understand culpability and responsibility and justice, or do you think they actually do know that the mother is engaged in murder, but they recognize that it would be more palatable, or the only way they're going to be able to do whatever they want to do is by soft pedaling? Do you think it's their convictions are just totally wrong and they don't understand, or they do understand, but they're being strategic about it?
I think they're trying to be strategic about it, is how they're justifying it. However, because the mainstream pro-life movement has been influenced by Roman Catholicism, they have a problem in their theology, in their catechism. And the problem is, on one hand, the catechism will say that abortion is a mortal sin. So they'll say, well, yeah, abortion can send you to hell, just like murder. However, there's a loophole in the catechism that says that if someone does not know that they are committing a mortal sin, then it becomes venial. So and this is very clearly, I've written about this. I wrote something that got published in American Vision years ago about this, but it's, I think that is the way they justify it theologically. So I think there's two things going on there. Yes, they know it's strategic, and that's an easier sell than what we're saying, but they also have a theological basis for this. And so it also helps them, by the way, when women have an abortion and later on they decide that they were wrong to do it, and then they decide to become pro-life. Well, then if they say, well, I'm the victim of Planned Parenthood's propaganda or the culture and its propaganda, then both theologically they're off the hook, and they have an eased conscience, where that helps build your numbers. There's just so many people in the States that have had abortions that, if you're looking for donors, frankly, that a lot of their donors are in that situation. And so they're not going to say to their donors that we think you should have been criminalized for this. And so I think there's quite a lot going on with that.
So then what's the what's the ultimate play, right? So if the play is not to obey the commands of Scripture, which is to save the innocent from slaughter, like that's we're commanded by God to care for the orphan, and these kids functionally are orphans because their parents don't want them, so they're orphans, and to care for the widow. And even though the woman isn't widow, functionally her husband is gone in many instances. So here you have an orphan, it's unwanted, and a woman that doesn't have a husband to care for her. And so here's an orphan, here's a widow, here's an innocent person, the baby inside, off to slaughter. We're commanded by Christ in all of the scriptures to do everything we can to save them from destruction, and to also punish the evildoer, and to ensure that the evildoer is punished. That's our job, is to hold the state accountable. If that's our clear mandate in the scriptures, then what's the end game? Like, what is the goal? What's the real play here in the historic pro-life movement, if not that?
Well, I think their play, if you're asking what the pro-life play is, what they're trying to do, they will say that they are hoping to change the culture to a degree that eventually that it will be unthinkable. Okay, so you'll hear Abby Johnson, although she's changed her language a bit lately, but there's others who say the same thing, that we need to make it unthinkable so that no one would even consider it. Well, that's just, if you have a sound theology of man and sin, you know that's not the case. There's never going to be a case where it's unthinkable. And so when we start to approach the issue biblically, from a biblical perspective, then you're immediately questioning like 90% of what the pro-life movement is doing, whether it's the Catholic theology that's behind it, or whether you're talking about the fact that, a lot of crisis pregnancy centers, when they get to the point where they're doing post-abortive counseling, they're doing kind of a psychobabble approach or a Roman Catholic approach to giving them hope rather than giving them the gospel. And so there's a lot that's flawed in this thing. The legislative side of it is a huge part of it, but it's not the only thing. When you leave the Bible on the shelf, that affects the legislative side of it. Romans 13 says we're supposed to bear the sword against the evildoer. Not the church, but the government is supposed to do that. So the government does that, or we're urging the government to do that. In the meantime, what ought to be happening is the church should be coming alongside women who keep their babies and support, offering them support like Choice for Two does, and helping out with bills, helping out with various needs. We try to do that as much as we can through the local church. So there's a lot going on with it. But I think the pro-life play is let's change the culture, maybe very positive about the things that we believe, not be negative at all. If you go to a March for Life, I would assume it's the same in Canada. In the States, the signage is policed, and they want it to be very non-confrontational.
Right. You'd never see pictures of torn apart babies at the March for Life.
Very rare. Yeah, very rare.
You would see it with an organization like the Canadian Coalition for Bioethical Reform, the CCBR, but you would never see it at March for Life. And I mean, I appreciate the work of like Campaign Life Coalition, especially the work they do politically when they will rank political candidates. They'll give them their score in terms of what legislation they voted on. Like, I'm thankful for the work that they do, but it is much more of a covered up kind of, let's not be totally honest, which, to your point about the theology, when you rightly understand anthropology and you rightly understand the weight of the gospel is felt when the weight of the bad news is placed first. And so it's really impossible to change the culture without first telling the culture, hey, you're a murderer, right? There's nothing that will drive them. The Spirit's not going to then drive them to cry out for mercy if they think, oh, I've just kind of done a boo-boo. But this is that faulty theology that you talk about playing out, and then how this gets imbibed by evangelicals, which also have very squishy semi-Pelagian theology anyway. So it's no surprise that everyone buys into this. So there's there's some other. I mentioned earlier some of the different maybe nuances of positions between these two poles, let's say, and so I would introduce another position. As I mentioned, I would kind of call them, let's say, principled incrementalists, where even though the position is we would still, if a piece of legislation came across saying, we will only legislate and punish the murder of preborn babies after 8 weeks, they would say we would still accept that legislation because as we weigh it out, that means that all the babies after 8 weeks wouldn't be murdered. The difference between them and the pro-life side would be, well, we do believe it is murder. We'll call it murder. We'll show the pictures. We'll call people to repent of their sin. And if the opportunity came that there was a flat out piece of abolition legislation, not only would we support it, but we would also advocate for the full and righteous punishment of all those who engage in it, so long as they're actually found guilty. So those two positions, walk us through the difference between them, because I mentioned that the debate between Toby and T. Russ, or even Doug Wilson and T. Russ, and clearly, even though I think they're closer than the traditional pro-life movement, it seems that they're still very far apart
They're
ideologically.
very,
Yeah. So
yeah.
talk to me about that, about what that chasm is between those two positions.
Yeah, the chasm between those two positions, and I can only frame it in the way that I think about it. I can't really represent exactly how Russell will say it. And I think there are some differences between the way that I talk about it and the way Russell talks about it. But in my mind, like the graphic behind me is from Choice for Two's Modern Child Sacrifice video. And a lot of these organizations that are consider themselves principled incrementalists, or they call it smash mouth incrementalism, they will agree that it's demonic child sacrifice. My question then is, how much demonic child sacrifice is acceptable? How much are you going to advocate for? So if in the States, I'm in Texas, right before the Dobbs case came out, they had the heartbeat bill pass in Texas. That's 6 weeks is when they were considering the heartbeat to be measurable. And abortion was going to be cut off at 6 weeks. And for a time, that's what the law said until Dobbs. So, people that would be principled incrementalists or smash mouth would say, well, they would support that. And they did. And I thought at that time it wasn't quite as popular a position, but there were people that were supporting it. And so my position on it is I actually went to Austin to the state capitol, and I testified against the bill in the Senate committee hearing meeting. And when the thing passed anyway, I found out who the legislator was in the House who killed the abolition bill that year and promoted the heartbeat bill that year. And then I worked to find a candidate who would primary her. And it didn't happen in the first election, but we got her out in the second. We actually got her voted out. She had every pro-life endorsement that you can have in the state of Texas. And we managed to have her thrown out. So people that are like, people that are principled or smash mouth, however you want to call it, incrementalists, I always ask them that. So you say what they say is run all the plays, run the incremental play, run the abolition play. I always ask them, would you run that play? Would you run the play where you throw out the person who killed the abolition bill and the pro-life hero? Would you try to do that? And I've never had an answer to that. Not even like an attempted answer, because they wouldn't run that. They're not really interested in running all the plays. See, when you have people, and I know some of these people are really well respected, but like when you are literally saying, I'm willing to regulate abortion to the degree that it can happen at 6 weeks, 8 weeks, wherever you want to set the goalposts. I have a problem with that in that it's demonic child sacrifice. And so, biblically speaking, when it comes to not narratives, but when it actually comes to commands, so when it comes to the prescriptive portions of Scripture, not the descriptive, those scriptures tell us things like Isaiah 10, God hates people who are writing iniquitous decrees, and he'll bring judgment on them. Decrees that allow for laws that allow for slaughter. It says things like God hates partiality. And so, like, I'm partial for babies, after 6 weeks, but the ones before, they can die. Those sorts of things, I say, are sinful because the way that you write the bill in Texas, when the heartbeat bill was submitted, it's submitted with a cover letter, and the cover letter of the bill says that it was regulation for the Health and Human Services Committee, that this was submitted there for regulating abortion in the state of Texas. Now, these people will say that they're not trying to regulate it. Well, if they're not trying to regulate it, then they should probably tell the authors of these bills and the committees, because they're understanding it as regulation of abortion. They criticize us for saying it's regulation, but I'm sorry, that's what the cover letter says. And so it's wrong. I grew up hunting. So as a hunter, I always say that, like, you always hit what you aim at. If you're not aiming at something, you'll never hit it. And so when it comes to whether you're talking about pro-life as a whole, like what we were talking about at first, the mainstream movement, or are you talking about an increment or a principled incremental or smash mouth? They're getting what they're aiming at. And what we're saying is you need to aim at ending it and demand an end to it with your legislation.
Being a member of our audience, you most likely do research, watch videos, and read articles that contain good and true scientific and economic facts. But these would be sources that some people in positions of power would call a fringe minority with unacceptable views. The truth is, protecting your privacy as you engage in the online world should be a high priority for you. I want to help your online security with something that is actually safe and effective, and that is private internet access, the world's most transparent VPN provider. A VPN, or virtual private network, hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. So, say you wanted to donate money to a lawful and peaceful trucker protest in Ottawa, and you didn't want the Liberal government tracking you down and freezing your bank accounts. A VPN would be your friend, just as any Canadian would. Private internet access will also never record or store user data, and their no logs policy has been proven multiple times in court and by third-party audit. It's very easy to use. Simply open up the app, click to connect, and that's it. PIA VPN is available for all platforms: Windows, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and many more. You'll also get to protect your entire household with one subscription. Our audience has access to an amazing special offer. If you sign up with private internet access by clicking on the link below and going to piavpn.com/libertydispatch, you will grab a discount of 83%. That's just $2.03 a month, and you'll also get 4 extra months completely free. I don't know if you've seen the price of eggs recently, but $2.03 a month for online peace of mind is incredible. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available, so don't wait any longer. Protect your personal data, get out of Big Brother's sight, go to piavpn.com/libertydispatch to get 83% off private internet access with 4 free months. So I'm curious to hear your response to this this offer, and I know that Toby brought this up as well, and I'm curious to hear your take on it. Someone says something to this effect: there are evil practices in the Old Testament that the Lord detests, and we see it's not only is it not a part of his design, Not only is it not a part of the way that he's structured it to be, but human beings are sinful. Human beings defy God's prescriptive law. And what the Lord will do in some of these examples is he will, in order to account for, or like Jesus said, because of your hardness of heart, here you have
Right.
God saying, okay, rather than come right out and say, this needs to stop or you're punished, you'll see God maybe, for lack of a better term, regulate it, right? So with divorce, for example, you'll have the Old Testament where God will say, well, okay, the Lord hates divorce. That's Malachi. But knowing the human heart, he'll say, here's some principles, or here's some guidelines, so that it's not as evil as it could be. Or maybe polygamy is another example that we brought up, that clearly it's not a part of God's design, and we understand, but sinful people take multiple wives. And so here God will say it's an evil thing, but instead of just abandoning your three wives, here's how you need to be as righteous as you can given the evil. Do you see that same correlation with this? And if not, how would you differentiate? How would you respond to that claim that, well, God allows for the quote unquote regulation of evil practices, as it pertains to human activity?
Right. Well, in that case, the one who's writing the law is God, and he's writing Old Testament law. We are not. We're not God, and we're not writing Old Testament law. And now we have the law of God when it pertains to specific commands. Those laws had to do with divorce, and that sort of thing. And so that's what God outlined. We don't have that freedom. And so we don't have the freedom to take that prerogative. We have to follow what God has actually prescribed. And so, that's really my answer to it. We don't have the wisdom. We don't have the omniscience. We don't have any of it, the holiness to be writing those sorts of laws. But we do have a command to judge, commands, plural, to judge righteously and with impartiality. And those are the things that we need to obey. That's what he's revealed. And so, and those are the commands. And so that's how I come down on that.
So I'm curious to know a little bit more, because I've never actually asked you this question. I don't know this information, but I'd love to hear it. Having co-produced the two movies, Babies Are Murdered Here, Babies Are Still Murdered Here, working with Choice 42 to put the videos out through Lure, which, by the way, all three of the episodes, I think episode 1, we had Laura and Kevin on. I think at episode 2, we had you and Laura on maybe. And then episode 3, I think I just interviewed Laura. I was quite exercised about that episode as well. I remember watching it. And when I was chatting with Laura, the first thing I said was, every step of the way, I said out loud, it's not okay. Like I was furious. So phenomenal stuff. We'll link to it in the description. Starting End Abortion Now. Take me back to the genesis of how this comes about, right? So whether it's in your own life or in your ministry, or what is it? When were you first gripped with this injustice of baby sacrifice, and then actually taking an active role in seeking to advocate for the helpless and save the innocent from slaughter?
Yeah. Well, in 2011, I got an invitation to go to an abortion mill. I was street preaching at that time, and by that time I'd been street preaching for probably 6 years or so, mostly doing it full time. And somebody invited me to go to the abortion clinic in Fort Worth off of South Las Vegas Trail. And I just went and I observed. I didn't really do anything. I just watched, prayed. And after 1 or 2 times of doing that with my family, the guy that organized the thing had breakfast with me. And he said, the only thing I ask people to do is to pray about what God would have them to do. And I encourage them to do that. So he says, just pray for a couple of weeks And when you think you know what you want to do, tell me and we'll go from there. And so I did that, and I came back, and I'm like, well, I'm a street preacher. So I said, what if at the end of everything, like the last 15 minutes, I just preach at the end of this thing? And at that time, that was kind of a radical concept, because people doing sidewalk ministry, I mean, they weren't open air preaching. Sure, and praying or something, right? And so here I am. I start preaching, and then I went to go plant the church in Syracuse, New York, months later. And when I got there, I just started doing the same thing in front of Planned Parenthood, and then in front of a OBGYN office where they were also doing abortion. And so I'm doing that. And then Marcus Pittman, who started Lore, and I've been friends with for years through street preaching.
Saw it a couple times.
Okay.
Actually,
so
when the
Marcus,
trucker convoy was going on, he was covering it, and because I had a little bit of a relationship, I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, do you want to interview someone who's in downtown Ottawa right now?" And then we came on a stream.
That was you.
Yeah, but we did it.
I remember.
We did it in a I can't say where we were, but there was a building where we were, and the organization, some people who work for the organization were friendly to the work we were doing. And they let us up in their building, which was all downtown was all locked off, by the way. So they let us into their building, which was illegal. And we warmed up there, had some coffee. And then at that point, I reached out to Marcus. I said, "Hey, I'm here right now. I have Wi-Fi." And then I came on his live stream, and we had to position the camera so no one could see where I was. What a time.
I remember all of that.
What a time.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I watched it live.
Continue.
Yeah. So that's great. Well, Marcus, we were going to do a video about our church plant. We were going to do like a promotional type video, and I goofed up and I got him the ticket to return on a Sunday. So the timing was he wouldn't be able to be there for the service. And I'm like, man, what are we going to do? And I've been going to the clinics, but the one clinic, the OBGYN office, said right on its website that we don't have any protesters that come to this, so you can be safe when you come here. And I said, well, I haven't been out to this one yet.
Challenge
so what
accepted.
If we just, challenge accepted. That's right. And we went out, and then my buddy and my wife, a guy named Robert Gray, who's an open air preacher, came up with the idea of Babies Are Murdered Here. He's like, I've always wanted to do this, where I just write just the words, no graphics, nothing, just the words. Babies are murdered here. And so the night before, we're sitting there sketching out on this poster board with marker, babies are murdered here. And we go out there, and all we did was film a trailer, ended up being like a 1.5-minute trailer. And we dropped that within the week. And people went ballistic over that trailer. Like, they were like, man, this is amazing. They got so excited about Babies Are Murdered Here, the idea. And so the documentary became us just traveling around the country with people who took that idea and were standing out in front of abortion clinics. So that was the beginning of everything. Jeff Durbin ends up seeing Babies Are Murdered Here not long after he had an interview with someone who was very involved with sidewalk sort of counseling. And that got Apologia going out there. And so that becomes sort of the genesis for End Abortion Now in 2017. And then in 2019, we filmed the sequel, Babies Are Still Murdered Here. And I co-produced on that. And right around the same time as that happened, I went because New York State passed the Reproductive Health Act in 2019 in January, just when we started filming Babies Are Still Murdered Here. I had a bookstore that we were running to help give the church a place to meet. And I shut it down in protest of the Reproductive Health Act. And it went viral. I ended up on like Hannity and Fox and Friends and Glenn Beck and all this crazy stuff just because I shut the store down. And it was then that Laura Clausen saw that, and she friended me on Facebook. And then we just started talking. And I sent her like Babies Are Murdered Here and some other abolitionist type material. a book called Doctrine of Balaam by Pastor Colley and some other stuff. And they changed how A Choice for Two, how they were approaching the moms. So they're kind of doing it like a typical pro-life play in Canada. Abortion's an option, but here's all the other options. And they went from that to saying, no, it's sin, it's murder, don't do this. And so over the years, I saw how committed they were, that they were willing to make a stand like that and lose donors, lose support. And you don't see that much. And so I really became impressed with them and just began to help them build their network of people who verify the women in person. And then over the years, started helping, just advising on some of the animated projects and stuff like this. And so now, I do wear several different hats, so to speak, with them. But I really appreciate what God has done there.
Yeah, my first encounter with Choice 42 was the magical birth canal video. I thought that was a real hair color too. I was like, oh no, like this is, I hope not. And then it turns out it's not. But that's the first time I saw their work, and I'm like, wow, this is so like, it's the same feel with the Build a Baby video. It's the exact same feel. It's like this satirical, punchy, but like just exposes the folly and the evil of anyone who would support this and advocate for this. Good stuff that they're doing there.
My first exposure to them was before, like I saw one of their videos, but I didn't see Magical Birth Canal right away. I saw the A Word, I think it's called, and I totally didn't get it. Like it went right over my head, and I think I shared it on my wall and I criticized it. I'm like, look at what these pro-choicers are doing now. They can't even call it abortion. And she came on there and she I don't even remember. It was some kind of satiric, you can imagine, some kind of satirical remark to my post. And it wasn't until we went viral. And then later I started to see Magical Birth Canal and some other stuff. It was just ironic that we end up becoming friends and working together, because my first impression was I totally didn't get the satire. But I got it now.
So one of the things that I bemoan being here in Canada is that right away, the murder of preborn babies in our culture is very sanitized. It is hidden. It is the mom, they won't show her the ultrasound. They won't, they'll, and then it's all under the cover of darkness, which is how the devil works and how he operates. It's always in darkness. And so it's very sanitized. And in Canada, it's increasingly so, because even though you have the Canadian version of Planned Parenthood here, the reality is in most places that are not big cities and even decent sized cities, you will find that the only place where a woman can go have her baby murdered is the hospital, is the state funded hospital. And so it's not as if they're like, Toronto's a different story, because Toronto, they have a lot of the mills around, but in a lot of cities, including multiple cities I've lived in, cities that are over 100,000, 200,000 people, there's only one place to go, maybe two places to go, and it's usually a hospital or some sort of clinic that does a lot of things. And so it's difficult in the Canadian context for people to go to the place that they know definitively what they're doing here is only killing babies, and to preach or protest or pray and plead. I just came up with an alliteration, by the way. That was not my intention. I'm just the Baptist. It's in me. It's there. So, but people, I've talked to people and they want to get engaged. They are so gripped with this evil, and their heart breaks over the slaughter of the most innocent among us. But they're wondering, what do I do? So, and what do I do, just period, right? So not only what do I do in terms of on the ground, but even the things leading up to that, the various ways that I can, from small ways to big ways, to actually honor the Lord by calling for the end of this practice in a righteous way and being honest about it. So given the work you've done in documentaries, given the work you've done with End Abortion Now, given your own experience in street preaching and ministry outside of abortion mills, what are some of the things that you can tell our Canadian listeners who want to do something? They just don't know exactly where to get started, and they don't even necessarily know what's available to them to be a part of this work. Unpack some of those possibilities and options for people.
Yeah. Well, I was at Crossroads Bible Church or Bible Chapel. I don't remember. Where
Crossroads
Pastor
Church.
Nate, right? Yeah, Crossroads Church, where Pastor Nate is. We did a one-day thing there and on abolition, and I said that, I'm an American. I don't understand all of the ramifications and laws and everything, but one thing is clear, and that you have to figure something out. You have to figure something out. And there was a guy from Trinity that was there, Trinity Bible, and he said, I thought he was mad at me. Thought I offended him, but he told me the next day that he was just really bothered by it. That no, it wasn't Amir. I know Amir well, but it was somebody else there who was just there as a guest, and he said it just bothers me that it's really true. We haven't really thought about what we can do, and so I'll just throw some things out there from talking to folks, but. You have bubble zones, but the bubble zones have to be requested. And as far as I understand, there's really only 8 bubble zones in Toronto, or not Toronto, Ontario. That's just kind of surprising. They have to be requested, and there's a backlog of them. Ford has a backlog, and he's not signed off on them. I don't know if I should be saying this all the way that I'm saying it, but the fact is, you could at least go once before they put one in, right? You could do the research on that, and it's available. That's one option. Another option is, of course, where you do have bubble zones, you could get outside of the bubble zones and look at a map and try to figure out where the main thoroughfares are, where they would be coming in, and you could at least hold signs there. And I think you could be creative with the wording of the signs to try to attract people who might be heading in. It would be something. And I know it's not as effective as like we had here in Fort Worth. We're right near the front door, but it would be something. The other thing is you're having an increase in chemical abortion, just like we are, although not quite as extreme as we are, but it is increasing. And so that's happening at pharmacies. Some pharmacies have bubble zones, but some don't. And so there could be something creative that happens there. I do this kind of work in front of IVF clinics. That's a whole other issue, but I will argue that when basically the statistics work out where you have 25 or 30 embryos that are destroyed for every one live birth. And so I stand in front of IVF clinics or fertility clinics that do IVF here in the States. We did that in Ontario, in London, when we were out there. And I know some people, Amir's been going out there as well. And the day that we were there, the fertility specialist threatened to call the police. And I think she probably did, but they never came. And there's no bubble zone around fertility clinics at all anywhere. So again, it might change if you started doing it, but there's an opportunity there. And we passed out a lot of literature that day that I was there with them and had some conversations as well. And so there are things that can be done. I just think that I wouldn't assume, because I think what happens is everybody hears bubble zone, there's bubble zones. And I think everybody just assumes every hospital has a bubble zone, but it's just not true. And so, because of how people have been arrested for going out in front of places that have them, I'm sure that's influencing why people just have it in their minds, well, no, we can't go there. But there are some opportunities. How long you'd have them, I don't know. I know one pastor in Ontario who's made up T-shirts that are very direct on the issue of abortion. They're basically abolitionist. and he encourages his people to wear them and walk through a bubble zone. So there's no law against that. There's your T-shirts, drop carding. You can get. There's a group of abolitionists starting in Canada right now. It's very early on. It might just be Abolition Canada or something. Maybe I can get the website for you to mention it. But
Even if you get it
they
after the
are just
fact,
starting.
I'll throw it in the show notes in the description, and probably
Yeah, I'll
reach out
just
to
send it
them
to
as
you
well.
later. We'll do it that
Yeah.
way. But they are starting with drop cards, signage. They're just getting started right now. And so it's very early, but there are abolitionists rising up in Canada. And then the other thing is, honestly, you just had the election, and Matthew Grove out in Peterborough ended up running there in his riding, and for the CHP,
Yeah,
Christian
I
Heritage
interviewed
Party.
Matt on my show a couple weeks before the election. I've known him for a few years. I was thrilled that he decided to run.
Yeah, and he ran on a straight abolition platform, and really that kind of thing. He ended up getting 168 votes or something. Well, that's a lot more than they had before. People interested in the issue before, and I think it takes that kind of thing too. To get a law in Canada, I gotta believe would involve the repentance of like an entire party, and they would have to be in control. And like it seems so impossible.
And the Senate would have to approve it, even though the Senate is essentially full of Trudeau appointees.
Right.
Yeah, we're in it for the long haul here. Like this is I've talked about this often with people. There was the first time that I heard it phrased this way was at an event in Peterborough at Hill City Baptist Church in, I believe it was November of 2021 or maybe November of 2020, one of the two. And it was a pastor's colloquium that was called, and basically all the guys who attended there were guys who kept their church open. And one pastor said, and the first time I've heard it out loud, other than just a thought in my brain, which is basically that we are engaged here in Canada in a multi-generational cultural revolution, that it might be 50 to 100 years before we see the turnaround that will come from a faithful church. But we all got to be like down for it. Like there's no get your rapture pack ready because it's going to poof you up any day. No, it's
Right.
Get ready. There's work to do that we're going to die before it's done because we're going to give it to our kids and grandkids. And I think people who understand what's what have accepted that reality that there's no political solution, and it's whatever it is, it's not coming anytime soon. And so it's time to work the field and get things ready. So we're all about that long game for those of us who again understand what's what.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, without even knowing everything that you know and everything you all know in Canada, I look at it just from over the last 6 years being involved with Choice for Two. I've asked people at Choice for Two, picking their brains, what would this look like? And it seems impossible. And I think the long game, that 100-year game, if you really are in it and you're training your families and you're building that kind of foundation, and at least now you can experiment with it, try to take over a party. Like I would say, like the CHP is probably the best opportunity you have to really influence an entire party.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to take time too. And so just it's a place to start anyway, right? It's doing something that way. And people will say, well, that's incremental. Okay. Yeah. But the goal is abolition. And Wilberforce had the long haul of ending slavery in England, but his goal was always to end it. That he wasn't trying to regulate it; he was trying to end it. So, yeah.
So I want to ask you a couple more questions, and I guess it specifically relates to, you mentioned we had an election here. You guys had an election in the South not that long ago. Anyone who knows me, who's read any of the stuff I've written in the last year, specifically on Christians and voting and politics, They know exactly what's what. We just did an episode earlier this week where we talked about, I just basically said that the Canadians who voted for the Conservative Party were like the Israelites longing for the meat pots in Egypt, only to find out that there's no freedom in Egypt, and freedom's actually hard, and slavery's easy because the big daddy Egypt state takes care of you. So everyone knows what's what. But I want to talk with you a little bit about, not just in light of the election, both of Donald Trump and now of Mark Carney, but for Christians who think about voting, who think about politics, and think about it in a, we're thinking righteous, biblical, principled way. We're with this in mind that, I mean, how do we perceive the role of the state and the protection of innocent lives? And if they fail to do that or say they're not going to do it, how should Christians respond to and engage with that? I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about that behind the paywall for our paid subscribers. But before we do, I want to give you an opportunity to direct people. Where can they find out more about what you're doing? Check out the documentaries, find out more about End Abortion Now, what's happening with Lure and the videos. I know there's a fourth one that there's no release date yet, but it's in the works, a fourth episode of Exposed. So give all the handles and websites and links for people to check out.
Yeah. Well, to keep in touch with what Choice for Two is doing with Exposed, you could go to Choice 42, choice number 4, number 2.com, and they will be uploaded there as well as the other social media platforms that they have, including YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So that will, I really don't even have a date for that yet, but it is in process. For Babies Are Murdered Here, I believe you can go to babiesaremurderedhere.com and get both the original documentary and the sequel, Babies Are Still Murdered Here, at the same spot. Lore is LOOR.TV. The videos have been uploaded there as well from Choice for Two. And it's just a great place that's kind of out of the box, kind of radical, crowdfunding of Christian film, and just film that's not typically Christian film. So there's that. And then if you want to follow what I'm doing specifically, you can just look up John Speed on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm also on Gab, and no H. That's right. Yeah, JON Speed. And you should be able to find me on all those places.
John, thank you so much for joining me on Liberty Dispatch. It's always good to chat with you. I know we've had a few interesting conversations off air in the last little bit, and I'm thankful for it. So for those of you who are departing from our conversation, you can check out all of the links and websites that John mentioned. You can head over to our Substack, ldcanada.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber. You can get the rest of this interview as well as all the extended portions of our interviews. So you might as well go do that so you can catch the spicy political bits, which I'm quite looking forward to. But nevertheless, until next time, Galatians 5:1. Liberty Dispatch has been brought to you by SDG Media. If you want to stay in touch with us and all things Liberty Dispatch, join our email list, or support the show, head over to ldcanada.substack.com.